Hello and welcome to ESI Focus, where we dive into a specific sector of the esports industry with special guests. My name is Kerry Wananen. I am the head of multimedia content at Esports Insider. This is the second episode of our mini-series focused on the legal intricacies of the esports industry, presented by law firm Sheppard Mullin. Big shout out. Sheppard Mullin represents athletes, influencers, content creators, media marketing companies, tournament operators, the whole nine in the esports industry. They've been representing these parties for a while, and they're going to continue doing it. For more information, check out sheppardmullin.com. In this episode, we're going to be discussing law and the convergence of esports and music. Today, I'm joined with Toa Dunn, the head of the newly formed Riot Games Music, and Sid Fohrman, partner at Sheppard Mullin's Entertainment, Technology, and Advertising Practice Group. How are we doing today, guys?
Doing great.
Happy to hear that.
Toa's doing great out in Hawaii. So.
Yeah, Toa's living the life.
Yes, hanging out, relaxing.
Sitting on the beach, drinking Mai Tais, I hope. Let's start with some introductions. Toa, can you share a little bit about yourself? I know that you've been with Riot Games for over 8 years, and you've also just kicked off Riot Games Music. Tell us more.
So, like you said, been at Riot since early 2013, and so I'm head of what is Riot Games Music, and it's really our music initiative that's focused on creating music experiences in and around our games mostly, and as well as esports and other products here at Riot. So everything from live performance to music videos and albums, we really just look to kind of lean into what we're really passionate about here, which is music, and how we can kind of amplify the different products and games here at Riot Games. So been doing that for a while. It's been fun. We just released, like you said, the player facing, which is Riot Games Music, the brand. So we have social channels, a YouTube channel to really kind of have a home for our content and a place for our players to meet us at. So it's been quite the journey to get here, and looking forward to this conversation. So.
Awesome. And Sid, how about yourself? I had your
yeah.
colleague Brian Anderson on last week, and he's also in your department as well.
He's in my group, yes.
Yeah, can you talk a little bit about the Sheppard Mullin Entertainment, Tech, and Advertising practice?
Sure. In addition to my position in that practice group, I actually lead our esports and games practice with my partner Dan Schnapp out in New York. And I'm also the head of our music practice. So this is the convergence of my worlds on this call, or on this podcast, I should say. My practice is fundamentally at the convergence of tech and media, and that includes music. And that spans across live events, AR, VR, podcast, fitness, connected fitness, and of course, esports and games. Our practice group, what we call our ATA group, is a very broad entertainment and technology and advertising practice, and spans the entire industry across the board. And we're California, Chicago, New York, and abroad, and some other offices throughout the country, and I think lend some real industry expertise and know-how and assist our clients in elevating their businesses within our space.
Yeah, sounds really exciting. And it sounds like you have a lot of different areas that you work with and a lot of different clients for sure. I want to dive in really quickly and give Toa a little space to talk about how Riot Games Music started. And you guys have just released the new Sessions Vi playlist just this week. And it's I think 39 song playlist with like a vibe around like lo-fi and chill type of beats. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, and to kind of get to like how we got here first, like you said, right? Really at Riot Games, I started as almost somewhat of an experiment. So a bunch of us at Riot, and even prior to me getting here, super passionate about music. We had a composer, and it was really, I was brought in to kind of explore what could we do with music. We know we love music. Just really how can we lean into it and do something cool, unique, and fun. And so really started off not exactly knowing what we're supposed to do, right? And it's one of those things we kind of talk about here at Riot, is kind of building the plane in the air. It's kind of like how it feels. But this turned into everything from like figuring out, hey, how do we create a bespoke song for a champion? We call our characters in our game and from our world champions. And so instead of kind of the typical just background orchestral track, we want to kind of lean forward and think about like, what is a more, we had a champion, his name was Lucian. And he was kind of this double gunslinger, futuristic kind of Neo Matrix guy, right? Really slick. And so this actually started off with thinking of different songs and references that we thought would represent them. And we kept thinking about the Crystal Method, some songs from back then that they had, kind of high energy. And then that turned into like, well, what if we reached out to Crystal Method, right? Would they want to work with us? And those guys were truly just like awesome dudes. Once we met them, they were up in the valley. We went to their studio, collaborated with them, created a song with them. And from there, that turned into creating songs, working with artists, to creating music videos, which our first one was called Get Jinxed. And it was kind of our way of promoting a new champion that was come out, in a 3.5 minute action-packed music video, to doing now. We have our esports ecosystem. We have our world finals where the last 2 teams from around the world come together to compete. And so we co-produce work with our esports opening ceremony team, basically to create kind of a la the opening ceremony, like Olympic style, but very musically driven. So we'd create a song, a music video, and then whatever artists we normally work with, they would come and actually perform live that song in the actual World Finals event. So, we've done Imagine Dragons back in 2014, Zed 2016. So we've kind of really found ourselves progressing more and more into leaning more and more into music, both from a, expressive way of like songs to live performance to music videos. And what ended up happening too is kind of growing the way we support that. So how do we market and distribute, this music? How do we, as Sid will know, like, how do we even work with labels and artists to even be able to do something like this? Which was a big learning curve for us, right? And figuring out how does this work in a more digital space that, video games was in, especially as early as 2013 for us. So that's really kind of been my main journey here at Riot, is really building that out so that we have an internal, music production team. We have songwriters, composers, producers, marketing and distribution, business as well, right? And working with our legal team and kind of building all of that so that we can do the really cool things in music. And that's led us to, just this past Friday, where we released Sessions. And it's a little bit different than some of our other projects, which are sometimes these really high, big events, kind of like KDA or the World Anthem. This one's really about our community, right? Content creators and streamers. Maybe they play, League of Legends or TFT or something online. And, music copyright is complex. And it's hard. Can't expect everybody to know the intricacies of all of that, right? And so we wanted really to solve, what we call the player pain. And, within our communities, like, how can they have really cool music, as part of their kind of daily lives? And this is one of them for them, is like for streaming. And so we have this kind of player safe, we call creator safe playlist. And that is music that, Riot fully owns, and they can play it without worrying about us DMCAing or any of that. It's really meant to be music that they can vibe to, chill to, focus, whatever it is they do. And we think there's kind of different aesthetics that we can fit into. So our first one, Sessions Vi, is really about the inspiration is behind one of our champions of our game. Her name is Vi, and it's a little bit of the day in the life of her, as far as like in the apartment when she gets back and decompresses. And so, yeah, it's a 37 track catalog. Worked with over 20 plus, producers and artists from that space of kind of lo-fi and easy listening and jazz and all of that, and then really did it for our community. And so that's pretty much our main focus, is really how can we deliver value for our players, for our audience, and that's what we're going to continue to do. So, yeah.
Yeah, Sid, before we hopped on this podcast, you were mentioning that your work prior to this had led you to working with Peloton and with their launch, and how they sort of famously launched without a music program in place. And that was back in 2015. And I'm sure you've been working in the space before then. So now in 2021, where Riot Games has their own sort of record label and is living up to that claim that some people previously called Riot Records as a game studio that is disguised, or a record label that is disguised as a game studio. Sid, how did we get to where we are now in terms of all of these contracts that had to have been formed ahead of time, and all of the procedures and rights and wrongs that happened on the route here?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question, and it's just amazing to, be talking to Toa and learning about what he's doing in the space. And I have to say, it's been a windy road to get us to this point where guys like Toa can do the things that he's doing at Riot and really moving this industry forward. So you mentioned Peloton. This is back in 2015 when connected fitness really wasn't even a thing. I think these new use cases across the board didn't really exist in a ubiquitous way that they do today. And, just kind of looking back and thinking about, where we were and what really was, some of the hurdles in 2015 that are no longer really there in 2021. And it, if I had to point to three things, I think it was, the feeling within the industry that, using music outside of traditional distribution models would, further commoditize music and devalue it. A lot of the labels and the publishers didn't really have the resources to dedicate to some of these new models, which would require, some out-of-the-box thinking and modeling and structuring of deals. And then there was this, I think, natural and certainly understandable friction between rights holders and companies with respect to the value of music to an overall offering, and it's amazing. And I think Peloton is just a great example of when media companies, tech companies, fitness companies are working in collaboration with the music industry, just how far we can go. And I think now we're beyond that pinch point. We're at a place in the industry where people are embracing the industry. Music industry is embracing these new models. Things that would have been dismissed prior are certainly being elevated and propped up. And I think rights holders have really become really comfortable with the proliferation of their music, engaging their fans in really disruptive ways, driving listenership and in turn revenues. And I think probably the most resounding aspect, or I should say evidence of that, is the catalog frenzy, which I'm sure Toa is very familiar with. You've got songwriters and selling their songs to third parties and losing all control over how those songs are licensed and used. And I think that is really evidence that we've embraced this world where there's no longer a real concern that my music is going to be used in a way that doesn't comport with my values, or I'm stuck in the old way of I just want to, distribute my music from an audio standpoint because that's the real art. I think Toa is doing incredible things where he's at, and many others in the space, in particular in esports and games, to engage an audience where they're living, where they're already playing, where they're socializing, where they're engaged, and the ability to bring the music industry to those folks in that realm. I mean, it's exciting. It's a great time to be involved in the music industry.
Yeah. I mean, to kind of touch on, what Sid was saying, I know, in the past years, especially when we were first starting, like, we definitely met a lot of that friction. I mean, just to kind of, without getting to details, but like, I know words like in perpetuity on the internet was like a very, almost a bad word right there. Just like, we don't, the industry didn't move like that. And for us, we didn't actually understand how to explain, well, there's YouTube, right? Like, and that's where a lot of our audience lives as far as when it comes to how they engage, with kind of the marketing assets and stuff. And so, for us trying to work with the industry and kind of let them know and understand, like, when we put something out there, we don't want to have to take it down because, there's actually value. We saw that over time, even drive value for, recognition or, marketing for the artist and that song itself. Right. And I think you're seeing that more and more, and there's more familiarity, like Sid was saying. So it's been quite the journey to get here, but I think that's what's key and important for like where we're going with this is like kind of both sides to kind of meet, understand, and kind of challenge maybe, what has been done in the past, because some of those, new media, I think, right, as it's termed now, right, just didn't exist. And so, those type of licensing contracts just didn't make any sense for what's going on now. But you're seeing, more mobility, you're seeing more kind of adaptation in probably the types of contracts that are happening. And that's how you get the things that are now starting to prop up within the industry. So it's exciting. So it's good though.
Yeah. And it really does take a true collaboration because, and not only as between the industry and the companies to develop these new media models, but for your listeners who may not know this, every sound recording has 2 different copyrights that is owned by at least 2 parties, sometimes 8, sometimes 10. So you could take a track and traditionally a label will own the sound recording, and then music publishers will own the composition that's embodied in that sound recording. And in this day and age, when you've got 6 people in a studio writing a song, they could all have their own publishers. So the challenge is to and then you have the artist and you have the artist team, right? So the challenge is to bring these 3 parties together, right? Get them on the same page and behind something. And that has been, something difficult to do. But again, I'm going to keep it positive. I think you're seeing it in ways, and I'm seeing it in my practice, things that I never thought would even be considered, even a year ago, are being embraced by A+ level artists, AAA artists who, are winning Grammys and fully embracing things that are just, outside the norm and bringing their teams along.
Started from the bottom. Speaking about collaborations, Esports Insider reported that Riot had partnered with Spotify in August of 2020. Toa, I'm curious if Riot Games music was involved or like on the table for this partnership at all. Was it potentially like an additional USP to the partnership? Was it sort of maybe the door opened up a little bit wider with this collaboration being in the works? I'm not sure how much you can speak on that at all, but I'm just curious of if that affected how Riot Games music came to be, or also how the music department in Riot Games had maybe changed how they were doing things.
Yeah, I mean, I can speak it from at least just a high level on kind of our perspective, right? So what's great is we think, at least at Riot, we're kind of like all at the table. We really try to think of a singular ecosystem in which we can kind of collaborate across the table, right? So like music, we work really closely with esports, obviously, for, even everything from broadcast to how they have music for the broadcast, so we work with other games. And so when it came to at least how Spotify came into the picture, yeah, we were definitely part of that picture, because it's being in the music team, and also, we're, internally, you can kind of look at it as we are the label for the music label for Riot. So kind of all music funnels through us, so that we can kind of distribute and market, and also think of how we can, activate more on certain projects when it makes sense. So we had already been building. We had a semi relationship with them just through kind of music distribution as well. So when the Spotify, kind of the official partnership happened, I mean, it really didn't change anything. It more became a conversation of like, okay, how do we, it's less of how does Spotify talk to esports, but doesn't talk to music. It's not that. It's actually, we all kind of talk together and figure out what are the things we can do. How can we continue to create value? So we're definitely like part of the conversation. And it becomes a value add even for us, right? What are the things that now Spotify, as being a Riot partner, right? What are those things that we potentially have access to? So I think it's really about driving value across the table, as in across the Riot Games ecosystem, which includes music, it includes esports. And I think that's the big value play in that.
Yeah, I think it's also interesting because while Riot Games actually does so much in terms of generation of IP, but in one of its biggest similarities, I think, with Spotify is that Riot Games is a launcher of sorts, and Spotify is a launcher for music. When you open Spotify, you're not necessarily interacting with that much from Spotify content. Of course, Spotify has exclusive deals and stuff, but you're interacting with a lot of different things through this portal that is Spotify. And going on to what you were sort of saying with like the streamers and the broadcasts and working together with the esports department, like I think nobody can deny that streaming is such a big part of esports and gaming and creating a culture these days. And what is a big distinction that I think everyone is learning more and more about in terms of song rights is the differences between streaming use and on-demand use. And so I'm curious, Sid, if you have any experience, or if you can speak about sort of how we got to this big distinction, because I remember a few years ago that was just so messy, where you had the rights to stream this song, but then when you put that on YouTube, then you would get, the proto version of DMCA, and it was just a nightmare, I think, for so many people. And then it really took a while for labels to really say, okay, we are taking the time to make sure that we have all of our ducks in a row to ensure that this playlist or our artists are safe to play.
Yeah. Look, I think technology has always, and consumption, I should say technology has always driven the way we consume content, and in particular music, right? So, if you look back, we used to have, tangible, records and cassettes and CDs. And then all of a sudden, we look up and we've got, MP3s. So now music's been digitized, and it's you can get it on the internet, and it's being, pirated everywhere. And then here comes iTunes, and they say, look, we have a way to monetize this and have people pay for it. So now we're downloading, and then here comes streaming, and the fact that it is so easy. Right? So you pay a subscription or you don't, and you have access to, the entire universe of music in your car, in your home, at your computer. I think, at the early days of streaming, a lot of the industry was saying, this is going to kill the industry. This will never stay around. And look where we are today. It is clearly the front runner in terms of the manner in which we consume music. Look, I think there's work to be done on the economics. We could have that conversation all day long. I think the challenge really that you're talking about is where you go from an audio only stream or an audio only consumption pursuant to which there is a mechanical royalty that's paid for the consumption of that composition that's embodied in that sound recording, so that you don't necessarily have to go and make separate deals with the publishers. Again, that's iterative. But the complexity really happens when you're synchronizing music to a visual. And so early days of YouTube, you've got all this music showing up on YouTube. They're on videos. It's UGC, and you've got the studios, the film studios, the TV studios, the labels, the publishers flipping out because all of their music is being used without payment. So, you're at a point, you're at a crossroads as an industry, and you say, well, what do we do here, right? Do we shut YouTube down essentially? YouTube, of course, relying on the DMCA, and there's a safe harbor there, which essentially, not to bore your audience, which protects distributors. So if they get a notice that there's something infringing and they take it down, they're not on the hook for infringement. And that's very simplified. But, what do you do, right? Because you've got this audience, you have this opportunity to actually, really drive revenue. So YouTube, gets smart. They start putting ads on. They develop, content ID, which can then go and identify, content and early days infringing content. And now it's a way to, monetize and figure out who gets paid for what, which, again, was another moment in time that I think set us forward, light years in terms of, TikTok doesn't exist, right, without YouTube happening. And now look at where we are there. So there was a lot of complexity to be worked out. I think the audio-visual nature of licensing music is still complicated. I think over the next 10 years, we're going to see, I believe, and it's tricky. I think some of that stuff will be streamlined when we look up in 10 years. But look, it's fraud. You've got fractionalized rights all over the place. And it is not an easy task to figure out, how to, aggregate those rights and do a deal that makes economic sense for all parties. So that challenge, I don't think, is going away, but I do, we've made major strides. And again, they're usually, it's on the heels of technology. I mean, that's really the driver. And the fans win, right? Like at the end of the day, the beauty of it is, the consumer wins when the industry can figure out ways to collaborate, work together, protect art, because that is important. I represent artists and publishers and writers. I'm not looking at this from a single perspective. I'm a musician, an amateur musician, and I'm a passionate music fan. And I have had a problem with what I have perceived, just personally. I'm just talking as Sid right now. That music's been devalued as compared to film or TV, and it's good to see that. I think we're coming back and people realize like how important music is, how integral music is, and a willingness to pay for it. And maybe that's being paid for by sponsors. Maybe that's being paid for by, tech platforms. But in the end, we all see the value of that. And again, the consumer wins, right? If I can go on to Fortnite, and I can now, dress myself with a tone, and that's representative, or some piece of music, and now that's representative of who I am. In addition to to all the other skins I'm wearing, you're now connecting with fans in a way that's completely different than just sitting back and listening to something.
Yeah, I'd like to that's definitely a great topic too that we probably could go on and on talking about. But I think it's actually really important, right? When sometimes I think the perspective is there's kind of two sides that are really not in agreement or don't like each other or fighting. When I think the reality is just understanding how value flows through things, and kind of like Sid was talking about, right, where the consumer wins, right, but also in that model too, the artists win, right? The art, like you got to support the art and the artists. You want to fund it so that it can continue to exist. Because if you get to starving artists, then eventually you get to no artists, and you eliminate art from the world. Nobody wants that world, right? And so we all crave that. And so it's really about understanding, with the kind of advancement of technology and consumption, how do we continue to support the art, right? Have that flow, because again, that's how you eventually get art supported, and it flows through, and you get consumers, you get players, you get fans that are happy, and that's really all it comes down to, right?
That's the best point.
Yeah, it's about happiness.
That's the best point.
You just got to create that. And what we've been, what the world's been trying to figure out is, like, with the advancement of technology now, internet and all the things that are happening, how can we create that streamline, unlock those pipes and that flow of value so that we can continue in our way, right? And it's just, there are changes that need to happen. And that's just what we're kind of like pushing through. And so it's good. Like Sid's mentioning, it's like you're seeing some of those pipes unlock. And so it's going to still continue, because like I said, I think the key word there is accessibility and streamline. Because once you really do that, that's going to unlock a ton of value. Like that's when the waterfall is going to flow through the pipes. You're going to see music kind of excel and feel, kind of be able to permeate into other spaces. And so, video games, at least in the place that I'm sitting, esports and video games, those are the pipes we've been trying to unlock. How do we make it more accessible, at least for our fans, so they're happy and stuff like that. So yeah, it's definitely going to be a journey as we unlock more and more pipes over time.
Yeah, and that brings me to my next point, where, Toa, I'm super curious how running arguably the first endemic music label in esports, I mean, I know you guys have been working on it under wraps for a while, so I mean, you probably have some history there, even though it's just been debuted. But so far, what's that experience like? And also, before all of this, before you guys, Riot was creating music for creators and really keeping this in mind, did you guys have any headaches prior to what Sid was talking about, of people uploading songs on YouTube and not attributing stuff, and then you are working with an artist? I'm sure that there was maybe lots of issues with anthems before, or original war songs, these sort of things. Take us through that a little bit.
I mean, yeah, like we had to learn as we did a lot of this, right? Like, because again, it was complex, and things like, YouTube developing a really great content ID system, right? Like when technology advanced, it kind of created a problem. You could say in the long run, probably a good problem, because it's something that needed to be addressed, right? But it was a problem that like hit both sides. Like, okay, it's being identified now in this place. How do we coordinate? Because it's creating a pain for like our players and our fans, right? It's less happiness for our players, and that's what we're really always trying to address, is how do we make this just a fun experience? And so, I mean, we kind of ended up here, right? Like it was never our mission to become kind of a traditional music label. We have similar functions that we learned and built, right? Like to market and distribute our music. This was our way of solving, like, how do we get our music to players, right? I think it was in 2014 when we had our first, technically our first virtual band, though that's not how we thought of it, but it was a metal band called Pentakill, and we had this album, and we were like, wouldn't it be cool to get it on iTunes, right? Like, how do we get it on iTunes? We had no idea at that time, right? So that began research. How do we get into, distribution, music distribution? And we used one of the services from back in the day to kind of first do that. So we learned to become to distribute, to market, to produce, to kind of do everything. And so we kind of just ended up here to an extent, right? There was definitely intent, but it wasn't to become a label. In fact, in our in a interesting way, we're technically, on some songs we're the artist, right? But we're also the label. We're also the songwriters and the music publisher all in one. And that actually helps us to navigate this world a little bit differently to an extent, right? When it comes to, okay, how do we get our music to players in a way that doesn't create a lot of that pain, because we can control a lot of those things. But the additive to that, and especially when esports, when we want to work with a great big artist, kind of an A-tier artist, or just someone we think would be awesome to work with, how do we collaborate with an artist that is already, attached to a label? And so we had to learn that, as far as like everything, again, with like new media rights, and then UGC on the different platforms, and then from a global perspective, because different countries and regions were kind of at a different place, especially when you get into certain Asian countries that are they may not use the Spotify's and YouTubes, for example, right? And so we just kind of had to learn and eventually figure out how do we, whether it's from deal making or even just understanding how do we just navigate that space, understanding the places we can kind of solve our player and fan pain. But it's still kind of an evolution now. Like, nothing's perfect yet. All right, we're getting into the creator stream safe, but still there's learnings in that too. And I think there's going to continue to be more, because, music copyright is super complex when you just get into the nuances and the intricacies, like you said, when it came to kind of sync VOD type stuff, and how do you really differentiate what's gray area sometimes, because a lot of things weren't fully defined before. And we found ourselves in those spaces at times. So I think as long as we continue to just work with our partners, work with, labels, work with, copyright owners, work with artists, and it's just really about educating, figuring things out, and then hopefully being able to do that. But we definitely came across a good number of our bumps along, and the esports anthems was definitely one of our leading ones, because that's one of our biggest music efforts over the past years that started from way back, in the beginning. I'd say I probably received a lot of my music copyright education through doing those type of projects. So yeah, it's been interesting.
Sid, I got one for you. What would stop an esports org from recruiting a music artist as they would a content creator or a streamer, and then put out their content as a sort of mini label in that sense? Is there a lot of roadblocks in the way of doing that, or is it maybe just not things are not in place for that to happen?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, the first roadblock, which is entirely prohibitive, is the fact that if you're talking about an A-level artist or someone that's signed to a label, that label is going to have the exclusive recording rights of that artist. So the first hurdle there is, if you take someone that's signed to a record label and you want to do exactly what you're talking about, you're going to have to go to the label and you're going to have to do a deal with that label, which essentially allows you to record new music, right? Presumably that's the idea, record new music and then distribute that music. And then you've got, the publicity rights of the talent. So you've got the artist very heavily involved. You got the artist managers involved. You got the artist lawyers involved, oftentimes with, varying viewpoints about the value of something and whether something's good for a career or it's not good for a career. And then you've got the publishing piece. So then you've got to get the publisher on board, who also is going to want, a slice of the revenue. And so, as Toa mentioned, it's complicated. You've got a lot of cooks in the kitchen, so to speak, and everyone's got to be happy with what they're getting. Everyone has a different viewpoint. The writer may have a different viewpoint if it's a co-write than the artist. The publisher may have a different viewpoint than the label. So, your hypothetical, I think, is a difficult one. I think, what Toa is doing, and I don't think it replaces, and I don't think you would say it's going to replace, doing, a collaboration with Drake or, or Doja Cat or some, you're not going to replace that with your own label, and creating music and owning it. It certainly makes things easier for Riot. And certainly I think you're going to see, people will be following in Riot's footsteps because of the importance of music and because of the complicated and fraught, rights profile. But again, I think consumers want to hear their favorite artists. So I don't think that's going to go away. And I think that's why you're seeing deals, Roblox is doing, just announced the Sony deal and BMG and Warner. And those are really interesting collaborations. But again, that stuff doesn't exist, 2 years ago. And I think what's great to see as a fan of the space is the adoption, right? The adoption of the music industry of esports and games. And I think it's smart, an in-game concert, where you can drive millions of people, to watch a streaming concert all at the same time. And there's real connectivity socially there. I mean, I have a 13-year-old son. This is the way he, more than I like, this is how he often connects with his friends. So now they're in Fortnite, or League of Legends. I'll shout out to Riot. Potentially watching a concert with their friends, right? And they're in their avatars and representative of who they are. And I think the next step, certainly I think you're going to see sponsors joining the party. That's a natural, which I think will further subsidize the cost of music, which is oftentimes what can be the stumbling block. And now if you've got third-party sponsors who are paying, to get to participate in a concert, to sponsor the stage or to sponsor a some aspect of a metaverse, you got millions of eyeballs on it. And maybe that subsidizes, the music piece and makes the economics more, a deal more easy to get done because you got all these rights holders and there's only so many slices of the pie. So long-winded answer, but I think it exemplifies A, the challenge, but B, the opportunity.
Toa, Riot Metaverse virtual conference when?
Right. I'll definitely have a seat at that, hopefully, if that happens.
Yeah. I think that in terms of all the things that, all the engines that are firing over at Riot Games, I really anticipate that they would probably be the first to pull something off because almost everything can be done in-house, right? You have the new record label. You've got, I was about to say best-selling games, but most popular games, some of the most popular games in the world, and an extremely loyal fan base. So I'm here for it. And friends, this wraps it up. We've reached our time. Thank you so much for the conversation. It was really, really nice. I think we could have gone on much, much longer for sure. It pains me to have to end it so soon, but I got to get on a plane tomorrow. And the next podcast, I'm going to be recording from Seattle. So I got to pack up my bags and hit the road. Sid, Toa, thanks again. Where can our listeners find you online if they wanted to get in touch or learn more about Sheppard Mullin or Riot Games music? Sid, let's start with you.
Yeah, of course, sheppardmullin.com. I think a Google search will get you there.
Yeah, and for me, LinkedIn, of course, Toa Dunn,
yeah.
As well as if you want Twitter or Instagram, all of them kind of Toa Dunn as well. But LinkedIn's definitely probably where I'm spending most of my time with conversations on these topics.
Sure. Me as well. Good call.
Nice. And another shout out to Sheppard Mullin again for presenting this episode. We have 2 more episodes in this mini series looking at law and esports and how it all works together. Thank you very much. And again, I'm Kerry Wananen, and we'll see you next time.
Yeah, thanks for having us, man.
Thank you.